If my kids had been born now, they would have been in at the dentist within the first week getting that fixed, and things would have been so different.
Balloons, bazookas, boobies, bosoms, boulders, cans, hooters, knockers, melons, honkers, jugs, rack, tatas, tits, torpedoes, guns, bust, doorknobs, coconuts, and our favorite one, the girls. Welcome to the All About Breastfeeding show, where your host, Lori, highlights mothers just like yourself and goes beyond the surface questions and digs deep so they share not only their joys and happiness in their daily breastfeeding life, but also their pain and struggles and how they worked through them.
Welcome to the All About Breastfeeding show, the place where the girls hang out. I am your host, Lori Eisenstadt, IBCLC, and I'm so glad that you're choosing to spend some time with me today. Before we start the show, I want to invite you to join the All About Breastfeeding Facebook community group. All you need to do is go to Facebook and search for the words All About Breastfeeding Community. You have to put the community in there, otherwise it brings up the wrong group. I opened this Facebook group so you can have a place where you can get to know other breastfeeding moms and share what your life is like as a breastfeeding mom. I also wanted a place that I could share all of my free resources, and I've put some of them in this group under the title on top, under Files, and there you will find a selection of handouts and checklists on topics such as colostrum, pumping and preparing to return to work or school, how to go about finding other mothers groups, and what to do if your baby is not breastfeeding well, and more. I hope that you will join this group so you get to share about the shows and get in some discussions about the speakers, and I hope that you enjoy the show. So, let's get started. Rachel O'Brien is a private practice IBCLC in the Boston Metro West area of Massachusetts with a Master of Arts degree in lactation. She runs a weekly breastfeeding and chest feeding support group and frequently blogs about breastfeeding and issues that affect nursing parents. Rachel also volunteers her time with USLCA and Project Licensure, a group committed to providing greater access to IBCLC care for Massachusetts families. Rachel is happily married and the mother to 3 fabulous children. In her free time, she enjoys knitting, eating Cadbury Mini Eggs, and pretty much anything involving drag queens. Welcome, Rachel, to the show. We're going to talk all about your IBCLC and the work that you do, but I'd love for you to start off by telling us about the family that you grew up in.
Well, Lori, thank you so much for having me. I grew up in a very typical white rural town in western Massachusetts called Belchertown. Grew up with a mom and a dad who have been married forever and an older brother.
All right, so you didn't move too far away.
No, I moved about an hour and a half east from where I grew up, so not too far.
Do you have any idea when you were a little girl what you thought what you would be doing when you were all grown up?
You know, for a while I was really obsessed with being a hairdresser, and there was a vocational school that was nearby, and I really wanted to go there for high school. And my parents promised me, they said, if you can get through regular public high school all on your own, when you graduate, we'll send you to beauty school. And so I did, but they never sent me to beauty school, so.
Oh, they reneged?
They lied. They lied straight to my face, but they did it out of love.
Of course. So what did you go for school for? Did you go right into school right after high school, or did you work first?
No, I went straight into college. I did an English degree. So my undergrad degree is in English and actually technical writing. I always liked the idea of doing magazine writing, or by then I knew that newspapers weren't going to work out for me. But I always liked the idea of writing in some form. So I thought, oh, well, I'll do technical writing and then I'll always have a marketable skill.
And that is why your blogs are so beautiful, and we're going to talk more about that, but you write really well.
Thank you very much.
Did you ever have the conversation with your mother about whether or not she breastfed you?
Oh yeah, all the time. And it's funny because if I look back, and I ask clients this all the time, if I look back on my childhood, I don't remember ever seeing anybody breastfeeding. Ever. But when I've talked to my mom about it, I know that she nursed me and she nursed my brother, and she had no problems whatsoever, and that her mother nursed all of her kids. She had 5 kids. So on my mother's side, everybody nursed. And I'm wondering if maybe that's why it didn't really even occur to me, even though that I'd never really seen anyone nursing. I just still always knew that, to me, in my brain, that was the normal way to feed a baby. And it fascinates me now when I talk to parents how few people, before they had their own baby, have ever seen a baby nursing. It's amazing.
You're like weird and geeky like me. Like I ask that question a lot, and especially it's fun when women come in with their own mothers.
Yes.
And how frequently, I don't know what happens with you, but frequently I have the moms say, you know what, I just had no idea that they were of the generation or two.
Yep.
Who were told that they were cows or they were given the pill to dry them up. But some of the other mothers who did try, that they will frequently say, I tried, but I guess I just didn't have any milk.
Yep.
And usually what they'll say is, wow, I never had any help. And I certainly wish I had met someone like you. And I will usually respond to them and say, I wish I had someone like me, because I struggled so. But yeah, I'm very enamored with that. When I don't know what you do if you teach breastfeeding classes, but I often ask the parents in the class, both partners, have you ever seen anybody breastfeed? Do you know if your mom breastfed you? A whole lot more. The answer is no, or she did for a couple of weeks.
Yep.
And once in a while, I will meet someone like you who yes, my mom breastfed me, my siblings, and she and all of her siblings were breastfed too.
Yep.
So, of course, that's very cool, but we're both seeing that it doesn't happen that often.
Oh, it's so rare. And I have to wonder how much knowledge is not getting passed down from generation to generation, because the people that I talk to that do remember seeing babies nursing growing up are not usually the people who run into as many problems. So, for instance, if I ask my friends, the ones who didn't seem to need a lot of extra help seem to be the ones who grow up seeing babies nursing. I just have to wonder how much people are missing out on from not seeing that.
I think it makes sense. And what I think happens is that it's part of the everyday fabric of your life. So in other words, when I meet women who they know that they were breastfed, some were breastfed until they were 2 or 3, and they don't remember why they exactly can't remember specifics. But I think it's just part of their everyday life. They're not looking at it as if 30 years from now is someone going to ask you if you remember breastfeeding.
Right.
Yep. It was just part of what they did. And as far as my background also, I have no idea. When people ask me, I have no idea why I even wanted to breastfeed, because I babysat a lot and I grew up on a very busy block, and I do not remember any woman ever breastfeeding. And my mother formula fed her 5, and my sister, who had her 2 kids before me, she formula fed. And then I was the first out of all my friends to have a child. So I don't know how I even can, when nobody around you is breastfeeding, and how do you get that? But I mean, I know I read about it in a book or 2, but it wasn't anything anybody ever highlighted. And certainly during my pregnancy, nobody ever asked me. My first exposure was in the childbirth class, and they were like, so you signing up for the breastfeeding class? And I was like, sure. But that was really the only thought I put into it. I mean, I knew I was going to, but sometimes I think about, well, how did you know you were going to?
How did you know that? That's fascinating.
So tell us a little bit about your breastfeeding experience. You have 3 kids. Tell us their names and ages.
So Charlotte is 12, Max is 8, and Micah is 3. So I have a daughter and then 2 sons. And I do think that, as with many people, my decision to become an IBCLC is very heavily weighted by the experience I had nursing Charlotte. So when she was born, I had her, and the lactation consultant came to the room and said, oh yeah, her latch looks great. And by the time we left the hospital, I had the bloody nipples. I was crying all the time. I couldn't figure out why it hurt so much. But I had done all my research before she was born. So I had my nursing mother's companion. I had all my little books next to me on my table next to where I nursed her. And I was just determined to make it work. I wanted to have a natural childbirth with her, and it took 36 hours, and it did not go the way I wanted to. I ended up with an epidural. And so I kind of felt like this was my last thing that I had to hold on to, that I really had a choice in. And there was one night in the hospital when the nurse came in and I asked her to just take Charlotte to the nursery for a couple of hours because she was crying and crying and crying and nursing and nursing and nursing. And the nurse said, if I take her, I have to feed her something. So I'm not going to take her unless you let me feed her. And so I did. I actually said, okay, fine, and they gave her an ounce of formula. And as soon as I got her back, she spit it all up on me. So what ended up happening with her was, it wasn't her fault. She had a very thick lip tie, and to this day I'm not really sure about her tongue or not. But I was too proud to get help. I was too scared. I was too nervous. I did bring her to a La Leche meeting when she was about a week old, and I had mastitis. I walked into the La Leche meeting, and I told everybody sitting there that I had mastitis, and the leader looked at me and said, I can help you. Let me see you latch her. And I said, no, that's okay. Thank you. And I didn't even latch her because I was too nervous to do it in front of the moms who were there. I felt too much like I didn't know what I was doing. So nursing her was really rough for a really long time. I think I probably cried at every feeding until she was past 6 weeks old. And so much damage and so much pain. And it never got great, but I just toughed it out because I was really stubborn. And I just figured that this was how this was supposed to be. And, every once in a while someone says, oh yeah, nursing can hurt. And I just thought, okay, well, this is what it is. And my mother did it. I know I have milk. I know she's gaining. I know she likes it because she's nursing all the time. But she got to be a year old and was still nursing every hour. And I couldn't hack it anymore. So when she got to a year, I weaned her on purpose. I couldn't do it anymore. And she did not like it, but I was just done. I look back at that now, and it turned out that her dentist, when she was 5 or 6, we moved to a new town, and her dentist kept saying, well, it's up to you, but she has a really, really thick lip tie, and we're worried it's going to cause dental problems, and so we want to send you somewhere else to get it fixed. They don't even do it there, so it wasn't like they were pushing it for their own practice. And after a year or two, they said, we're not giving you a choice anymore. She's getting decay between her front adult teeth. You have to send her to get her lip tie fixed. So she had hers done when she was 8 years old. And suddenly, so much more made sense. I went, oh, okay, yeah. So in between that time, I think I kind of felt like, I worked really hard for this thing, and I want to be proud of this thing. So I'm going to help other people because they're going to work really hard too. So at the time I had really wanted to become an IBCLC, but not being a nurse, not having much of a medical background, there wasn't really a way for me to do it. So I ended up sitting on my hands for a while. The second kid, nursed like a charm. No problems. But then it was interesting because the second kid I had to go back to work full time, and the second kid didn't really care about nursing all that much, was so used to getting a bottle all the time that I sort of had to force him, not really force him, but I really had to cajole him to get to a year. He really didn't care. He was over it. It didn't matter to him the way it mattered to me. So, I was working full time. We had an older kid. We got to a year, but it was a forced march at some points. Like, come on, do you want some milkies? You want some milkies. And he didn't care.
Sit down and have some milkies.
Come on, come on, please. Yeah. So we got to a year, and that was a little bit rough. But then my third kid, I was actually a CLC by that point, and I was doing a Pathway 2 program to the IBCLC, which means that we actually do a higher ed program that's based around breastfeeding. So it's a college level program. So I already had my bachelor's. I ended up getting my master's in lactation as a way to gain the requirements I needed to sit for the exam. So when my third kid was born, I was in the middle of that program. And as soon as he was born and he was nursing and I was tired and I noticed that same pain that I felt from my daughter. And the lactation consultant came into the room and she knew that I was doing lactation for school and stuff. She knew that I knew what was happening. And I said to her, "Did you check him for lip tie or tongue tie?" And she said, "Well, no, didn't you?" And I was like, I was a little busy.
And I'm the mommy.
Pushing this baby out. So no, I have not checked. Can you please just look in his mouth? So yeah, so my third kid ended up with a lip tie that was just as bad as my first kid. And I ended up getting that one revised when he was 6 days old. And the amount of difference it made was amazing. And it made me realize how much I had gone through with my first kid that I didn't have to. I was just being stubborn. In the end, I didn't get any sort of medal for that. Nobody gave me a reward. It's just so sad.
So here's a couple of things for us to think about. And believe me, I understand stubborn. That's how I got through with my first one. But I'm wondering, in addition to being stubborn, were you afraid to, not do anything about it other than, like you said, you went to La Leche League, and were you afraid? You didn't feel comfortable nursing in front of them? Or was part of it that, because this was part of my issue, is that it's this natural thing to do. I should know what I'm supposed to do, and it feels stupid not knowing.
Well, one thing, I think the thing that got me when I went to La Leche, and this is not in any way a knock against the leader that I had, but it was very hard for me. So when I came in, we sat around in our little group, and her 4-year-old walked over to her, picked up her shirt and nursed, and then walked away. And all I could think was, she's not where I am right now. In my mind, I had mastitis, I had a newborn, I was exhausted, I really wasn't thinking rationally. And in my brain, I just thought, if that's where she is right now in her nursing journey, I can't imagine her being able to help me with this. And I was still very much, I was very nervous about nursing in public. I was very nervous about anybody seeing any part of me. I've always worn shirts that are buttoned all the way up. I'm not a person who ever shows cleavage. I'm just not. It's not who I am. So I think it was a combination of the two, but I don't think I ever felt like I should be able to do this and I can't. It just felt like, well, for me, this is how this is going to go. And it's going to be, I'm going to get through this.
So we know what happens with women. We're not postpartum, right?
Right.
And then we're working with moms, so we can be a whole lot more objective.
Right.
than when it's our own self and our own situation. So I'm curious to know, before she was born, I know you had the great book, but did you take any breastfeeding classes, watch any videos, and who was your partner? Who was with you, and what did they say when you were suffering so?
At the time, so 12 years ago, there was no YouTube. The moms and dads now, I feel like they're so much luckier. They have so many more things at their fingertips they can watch. If I had wanted to watch a breastfeeding video, I would have to go to the library. So I did. I had a lot of books. I had taken whatever classes I could take at the hospital. I did hypnobirthing. I did the breastfeeding class at the hospital. I got whatever education I could find beforehand. So it wasn't that I wasn't aware of what was going on, but I didn't know anything about ties, and every time I tried to fix her latch, it didn't make any difference.
It's interesting because I often think that we can be as educated as we possibly can, even watch all the videos. I mean, even the moms that we work with now. But when your baby has something that's really limiting their ability to get a good seal or get a good deep latch, and it's killing you, it really doesn't matter what you know about position and latch and how to get your baby on, because if your baby can't do it comfortably and efficiently, your baby just can't do it.
Right. And it was very hard for me that her feedings never spaced out. I mean, even when she started on solids, at the time, I thought that it was that she was very clingy. I thought that it was that I was her only source of comfort, which, I was, but But looking back now, I realize that the amount of effort that she had to put forth for a feeding was wiping her out. And so she'd do a feeding and she'd get as much as she could get and she'd be exhausted and she wouldn't really get a full stomach. And then an hour later, she'd be wanting it again because she never really fully ate. Looking back, it's also clear.
Right. And I wanted to highlight that because the other thing is a lot, we're told, we read and other people say breastfeeding takes a long time. Babies are nursing all the time. But then there is a difference between what we really know. Like when I ask that to parents, I'm asking what is all the time to you, and how frequently, because when you're in a position of never having breastfed a baby and you're going from whatever your life was like before and now you're breastfeeding, if feedings are taking an average normal time of half hour to 45 minutes or so, or even an hour, and then your baby's spending an hour and a half, 2 hours in between and then coming back to it again.
Yep.
Well, in very early newborn days, that's fairly normal. But to a mom, they're like, my baby's nursing all the time. So there's that nursing all the time, or there's your nursing all the time, where probably it sounds like literally every hour on the hour,
Yep.
these feedings and one rolled into the next.
Yep.
And that's what I want parents to know, that is not normal. That's
Right.
a baby that's, however you want to put it, snacking, just they're so hungry, they're getting whatever they can get until they get a little hydration, a little food in their belly, and then they're conking out again. They're so tired, and or their tongues are getting tired. They're not forming a good seal, and the effort to get their food is tremendous. But that they never get full, they're hungry, so they come back at it very soon again. That's not normal.
It's exhausting for everybody involved. It's exhausting. We tell parents that they're going to be tired, and I know that they hear us, but a lot of times, especially if you've got a baby who's, doing something like that, it's just, the word exhausting doesn't even begin to cover it. I mean, I remember when the sun would come up, I would be thinking, oh, thank God, it's daytime now, because when it was nighttime and I was up all night, I felt like I was just losing my mind. At least when the sun was up, it felt like I could handle things better. I was very lucky that my husband was formula fed everybody in his family. And he's, comes from his mom's got, 13 brothers and sisters. His dad's got 10 brothers and sisters. So giant New York family, nobody breastfed. And I was really lucky that my husband just looked at me and never said, maybe you shouldn't do this. Never said, this isn't working. He trusted me and he trusted what I was feeling. I'm so grateful for that, really, because it could have gone so many other ways.
Well, especially when he sees you sleep deprived, major. I think the bigger thing is for most of the partners is seeing you in pain.
Yes.
And suffering.
Mm-hmm.
And that's part what really gets to them. And I understand it. I mean, we both know that that's not help, but I understand why partners or family members say it's okay, just give the baby formula. They're trying their best to be helpful. And of course, we're looking for a different help. If you were to have visited with an IBCLC with your first Charlotte, it sounds like it would have probably been a very different experience for you if they had caught the lip tie.
Oh, absolutely. And, it's funny because I go back and forth on the tongues all the time, and it's really easy, to look at babies now, but when it's my own kids, I have looked in my own children's mouths 1,000 times. I have done oral exams on all of them. For my kids, what really, really affected them was their lip ties. Their lip ties were so thick that they just couldn't get a good seal. And I saw the huge difference. And I'm one of those people who, when my third kid, when he got his lip fixed, he only got his lip done. He did not get his tongue done. I will tell you, just the lip, and I'm not saying this for everyone, but for me, just the lip made all the difference in the world, all the difference. If my kids had been born now, they would have been in at the dentist within the first week getting that fixed, and things would have been so different.
What's so interesting is not that was a reason to have a third baby, but being that you did have a third baby, you were really able to probably take a look at your first experience and say, yeah, that was more than likely my biggest issue.
Absolutely.
because you could really see the difference between the before and after with your son.
Not everybody gets that if they manage to get a release. I had the immediate, they did his lip, I was in the chair, they handed me the baby, he nursed, and I went, "You're kidding me. It doesn't hurt." It was amazing.
You're kidding me in a good way, right?
Yeah, in a good way.
Taking a little break so I can share this info with you. I am really psyched to be able to share this next piece of news with you. My regular listeners are very familiar at this point with Momentum, the organization that I talk about on each show. You know, the one that I say saved my life as a new mother, the organization that helped me find other mothers who were new at this whole mothering thing. They became my people. They helped me navigate that first year of motherhood and continued to mother me as I had more kids, and my need for support through their toddler years and kindergarten years and elementary school years just kept being needed. I made lifelong friends, and they were so helpful that I am doing all I can to continue to support the organization. I want Momentum to continue to thrive, and I want you, my All About Breastfeeding audience, to experience just some of what Momentum is all about. The ladies of Momentum have agreed to give my listeners a 14-day trial membership so you can see what this mother-centered thing is all about at no cost to you. Just hop on over to allaboutbreastfeeding.biz/podcast. You will see a link from Momentum. It's in blue, and you just click it on and it will bring you to the page for you to sign up for your free trial. Honestly and truly, there's absolutely no cost to you. This is just a great opportunity for you to enjoy the discussion groups and the blogs and webinars and educational pieces that are available for free for you. I will have a link to this in the show notes. And now, back to the show. You know, it sounds like you had so many times. I mean, I know I had so many times where I just felt I couldn't go another, forget about day, but sometimes even another minute. So with Charlotte, do you remember one specific time period where you just really felt, I'm just done? Like before that first year, was there a time when were you really depressed and overwhelmed and you were just ready to stop?
I think there are many times that if I had not been so stubborn about not having formula in the house, I would have done it. I would have just been like, I'm done. I can't do this anymore. I remember crying through so many nursings. And then, you know, I was so sleep deprived and so on edge that my parents would come over and take her and say, we'll take her, we'll take care of her, you go get some rest. And I would go up in my room and I would turn the fan on and turn the sound machine on as loud as I could so that I couldn't hear her, but I couldn't do it. I couldn't sleep because anytime I heard a noise, it was like, I tell people it's like the fire alarm going off in your brain. Like you're so hardwired to that child. And, you know, it's so sad that I look back now and I don't see her newborn time as being, you know, sweet and joyful and special. I look back and I see it being really hard to get through. We made it. She's an amazing kid now, but I wouldn't wish that on anybody.
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. All right, what I would love to know is, with everything that you've been through with your breastfeeding experiences, is there one thing that you would like a new mother to know?
The biggest thing that I tell my clients, my home visit clients, is to watch the dirty diapers. If you're counting the diapers, you don't have to worry so much about everything else. They tend to be right from the beginning concerned about whether or not baby's getting enough. And I get that because, you know, the babies don't have a little full indicator on their belly. It's really hard in our society. We're so used to measuring everything and tracking everything. And I just try to get through to them, you know, if you're getting more than 3 diapers in a day that look bigger than a quarter, you're doing enough. It's going to be okay. You just have to get through one more day, you know. I think it would have been better for me to have some other indicators of how it was going well versus how it felt, because it didn't feel like it was going okay.
I have a checklist for people, and I talk to them about that there are many factors that you need to think about when you're asking the question and answering, is this going well? And yeah, I mean, pain is one thing that we're saying this is part of breastfeeding that's not going well, but you're looking at a lot of other things. And so I like what you say about that, but I'm curious, do you talk to parents about the first couple of days of the output? Because one of the things I find is that babies, they're frequently going to pee and poop in the first couple of days, even if they're not getting the greatest of feeding.
Yeah.
And I think a lot really happens once you hit the third day.
Absolutely.
Like that's even more relevant than what happened those first 2 days.
I go to their houses. So they're usually the earliest I see them is going to be on day 3. So really, I don't see them much in the very, very first couple of days. So by the time I get to them, they should be getting on the poop train, getting things really moving.
Yeah. Moving. Hey, that's a fun pun.
So the other thing that I end up telling parents all the time is it doesn't matter how the latch looks, because they'll say to me, she said in the hospital that the latch looked great, but it really, really hurts, but it looks great. So I don't know what I'm doing it right, but it hurts. And I keep on saying, doesn't matter how it looks. It could look very strange to me, but if you're not hurting and the baby lets go and the baby has a good feeding and your nipple looks fine, it doesn't matter what I think it looks like. And the same goes for it can look beautiful, but if you're in pain and the baby's doing damage and there's a problem, it doesn't matter that I think it looks beautiful.
Exactly. I have a lot of different sayings, but one of them is, if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Yes.
And yeah, it doesn't maybe not look like picture textbook, and the opposite also, if it's hurting and everybody is telling you that the latch is good, I'm getting in there.
Yeah,
It's not good. I don't care what anybody says, it's hurting you. We got to get in there and, check the whole thing out. So yeah, there's a lot of myths surrounding the latch, and I'm sure you hear this a lot, moms who call you up and say, they said the latch looks good, but yet they're telling you that it's killing them.
Yeah.
And we're trying hard to tell them, okay, and it's not that I don't believe whoever told you that the latch is not good, but it's hurting you, so we need to look at the latch, because lots of times people call up and they want you to help them try and figure it out over the phone.
Right.
And they're insisting that the latch is good. Sometimes I'll even say, okay, maybe the latch is good, but there's still something else going on, and that needs to be taken a look at. So, yeah, so it's pretty funny. We get I wonder where that's coming from, the whole thing with the latch looks good or not good, and then people deciding that they need help based on that, or that it's going well or not.
Yeah.
I like to talk to parents. There's about 5 to 7 things that we're looking at when we're trying to figure out if this is going well or not. And I want you to think about the first baby, Charlotte, because by the time we get to baby number 2 and 3, we're very used to everything that was strange before, which means that whatever life you had before you had your first baby, then you have your first baby, and the way I like to put it is that your whole world has been turned upside down and inside out. Mm-hmm. And I'm not saying necessarily good or bad, but it's just so different than the life you led before. So by the time we have a second and third baby, we're used to now being a mom, called a mom, and this lifestyle. So I want you to think about with Charlotte, if you could put your arms around your newly postpartum self and whisper just one thing in your ear, what words of wisdom would you tell yourself?
I would definitely tell myself it's okay to ask for help, and it's okay to receive help. It doesn't mean that you're failing at this. It doesn't mean that you're weak. It doesn't mean that you're doing anything wrong. It's okay. That's why people are there. They're there because they want to help. You can take that help.
Oh, that's so big, Rachel. Thank you so much. I wish that I had gotten that, because for me, the family that I grew up in, to ask for help was a sign of weakness.
Right.
And I, of course I learned later on that to ask for help is a sign of strength. I need help. But that is not the way I was programmed as a new mommy.
No.
You have any kind of fun stuff? I call it tales from the breast. Any fun things that your kids have said, or a funny story you have about breastfeeding?
My stories are all so boring. I was thinking about this. I tend to be I hate the word modest, and I don't care what anybody else does. It's just the way I personally have always conducted myself. So I have very large breasts, so it's really fumbly, to nurse in public. I always had a hard time with it. So I didn't nurse my kids that much in public. I would always make sure I was, in a booth or something, and that's how I was most comfortable, which was fine. But there was once my family stopped. It was a long car trip, and we stopped at some diner in New Jersey off the highway. I was nursing my third son. So at that point, I was more used to everything, but I was nursing him at the table, and the waitress was pretty young and didn't realize I was nursing, just thought the baby was asleep. And she came over to I don't know, give us ketchup or something. And at the same time, my son had pulled off and was smiling at me and getting squirted in the face. And I was looking down at him and laughing. And the waitress, was being very sweet and was like, oh, what are we doing? And she looked down and her face just turned white. And she never came back to the table. She just never.
Oh, my goodness.
She had somebody else bring the check over and everything. And I mean, if that had been my first kid, I probably would have been mortified. But I thought it was hysterical.
And it is. Not only what was happening in the booth, of course, I think that's funny, but what's crazy is her reaction. Wow.
But I get it. If I never saw a baby nursing growing up. I might have seen the baby that was on Sesame Street in the 70s. I don't know. So I get it. I understand. We can talk about it being natural and normal as much as we want, but if people don't see it, it doesn't matter. You can't do things you don't see. And so I can totally understand why it freaked the waitress out.
Well, I'm laughing. I'm more laughing, but I can understand that. But that extreme of not coming back to the table. Here's what I would love to know. What is it she was thinking, and what did she think was going to happen when she came back to the table? That's why I'm like, wow. What did she think was going to happen?
I almost feel like she maybe was embarrassed for me. That's the way that I've spun it in my head. That she thought that I would be embarrassed by it. So she thought maybe this is what I've decided. Maybe she thought, well, if I don't go back, then she won't feel embarrassed about it. But I wasn't embarrassed. It was funny.
You're funny. You're a lot like me. You're trying to get into the head of the waitress about what she must have been thinking. And if you can't come up with something good enough, you're going to make something that's going to sound good enough. So I would love to talk a little bit about your business. So from one IBCLC to another, there's a bunch of questions that I have for you. And I want to find out, first of all, if you could tell us a little bit about your practice. I believe you've been practicing for about 3 years.
So I was actually a CLC before I came an IBCLC, and that was part of my degree requirements. The program that I went through required that you become a CLC.
Can you share with us what that's about? Because not everybody knows.
Right. So CLC is Certified Lactation Counselor. I believe it's about 45 hours. And you learn a lot of good stuff. It's a lot of basic breastfeeding management, a lot of normal. You learn normal. You learn what normal looks like, what normal is supposed to feel like, how to assess for normal, basically. And then what you do is you take a test, which is a multiple choice test, and also you watch a couple of videos of babies latching. And you would actually score their latches, the special assessment tool that they had. And that was the test. So it's a week worth of class and then a test. And then you are a certified lactation counselor. And my understanding is that the thought is that you are then equipped to handle normal breastfeeding situations. So breastfeeding education, helping people with normal questions, with normal things that are happening. And so I was doing that during my grad program. So I was doing that for about 3 years while I was shadowing a local IBCLC. I had that certification so that I could be able to do what I was doing under her watchful eye and still prove that I knew something while I was getting all the hours that I needed to sit for the exam. I had to do 300 clinical hours along with a bunch of other things to sit for the IBCLC exam.
Tell me a little bit about when you think about what you knew as a CLC and what you now know. What would you share with parents about the difference and why you would want to see an IBCLC if you're having breastfeeding challenges?
Well, it's very interesting because there are a bunch of different breastfeeding certifications that are available out there. And what the certification tells you as a consumer, if you're looking at someone who has that certification, what that certification tells you basically is the bare minimum that that person needed to know and do in order to do that certification. So a lot of people don't know the differences, and there's a lot of them, and I completely understand why people don't know the differences. So for me, the biggest difference between being a CLC and being an international board certified lactation consultant was the clinical hours. So in order to become an IBCLC, you need to have, and I'm probably going to get this wrong because I haven't looked at the test requirements lately. It's somewhere between, I think it's 300 and 1,000 clinical hours that you have to have logged as part of your training before you're allowed to sit for the IBCLC exam, which means that you've seen babies nursing in real life. You've actually had hands-on experience. You've been able to watch someone who is already an IBCLC, but hopefully you've been able to see somebody else do the more complicated clinical work, and you have more hands-on experience before you can even sit for the exam. It doesn't mean that someone with a different certification is not as good as I am, and I want to make that really clear. You can have a CLC or a CLEC or any of these other certifications and be amazing. What the certification tells you is that minimum requirement that you have to have met that specific certification. So in terms of IBCLCs, we have to have a lot more background, a lot more stuff under our belts before we can even sit for this giant 175 question exam that's very long and very detailed. But we have to jump through a lot of hoops before we get to that point.
Have you always had a home-based practice where you provide home visits, or have you worked anywhere else in clinics or WIC or in a hospital?
I've only really done home visits. It's really what I love doing, although I actually am in the midst of interviewing for a hospital position, and I actually did a 3-hour shift today, this morning, which was very exciting for me to see.
Cool. How was that?
It was so very different. It was very funny how different it is because, I'm used to seeing the moms and dads, like a week or 2 weeks, or hopefully not. Hopefully I see them before that. It was very different to see them in the hospital.
Yeah, now you get your hands on a brand new baby.
Freshies. I call them freshies. They're fresh out.
I know. That's so sweet. I love when I worked in a hospital and I taught the breastfeeding classes, and I was friendly with some of the midwives, so parents knew that. And so if I was ever on shift when they gave birth, I was just, I was like, hey, if you want me to come in the room and check on the baby, I'll be happy to.
Right.
And so, yeah, just holding all those sweet, they still have that smell to them. I just love helping a mom that very first latch or two and really getting her off to a good start.
Yeah. And the look on their face, it's just amazing.
I know. When you do your work, I'd love to know the two things. One is the best part of your job, and then I'm going to ask you to follow that up with the hardest part of your job.
The best part of my job is absolutely when the visit's almost over and everybody's getting tired and I'm packing my stuff up and the mom says, "This was so helpful," or the dad says, "This was so helpful. Thank you so much." The best is when I walk in, and they're nervous or scared or worried. But when I'm walking out, I can hear that relief in their voices. That's the best part.
Very cool. Do you ever have parents? I always think it's funny that sometimes, they'll say, "So what do I owe you?" And I sometimes I just hesitate. Not hesitate, but I just didn't answer quick enough. And they'll be like, I'll like almost pay you anything. She's so happy. And so I'm like, okay, well, $10,000. Right. How does that sound?
You have a really nice car. Can I have it?
Yeah. And some people, they're like, well, if I had it, I'd give it to you. I actually wouldn't have a problem with that. You've been so helpful.
Some people say, like, can you move in? And I'm like, if you pay me, absolutely, I will move in.
I know. I start to think, what was my life with my family like this week? And you have this beautiful house. Maybe I will. I don't know. And so what's the hardest part of your job?
The absolute hardest part is not kissing those babies on the head. Oh my gosh. I know that sounds silly, but I try really hard to not kiss somebody else's baby. And sometimes when you're holding someone's baby on your shoulder and you're smelling them and, you're holding the baby and the mom's doing whatever or the dad's doing whatever, I automatically, I instinctively go to kiss them. And then I go, you can't kiss this baby. You can't do that. That's not professional.
I know, it's so hard. And I don't know about you, but what really drives that home to me is I've had other moms come into my practice and say, they've been to this consultant, that consultant, or that person, or maybe even a pediatric chiropractor who's a female or whatever. And they've mentioned that they weren't going back specifically because that person kissed their baby. And so that really has driven it home to me. And I've never done it, but it's just another reminder because we get used to it and we don't even think about that. Wow. So we always have to remember what's going on in the new parent's mind. Mm-hmm. So that really drives it home for me. And what I'll do a lot is I'll put like my cheek against the back of their head also. Because the other thing I get a little, I wouldn't say the word is paranoid, but if for some reason their baby ever got sick, the last thing I want them to do is start second guessing if I could have passed something on to their baby. So I am extremely careful not to be face to face and too close and that kind of thing, because I just wouldn't ever want to be that possible link.
If it's not a consult and it's a friend's baby I just happen to be holding, I tend to warn the parents if I'm close enough to them and just say, like, I am probably going to kiss the back of your baby's head. And I'm tell me if I can't, because I just have to hold it in all the time when I'm working. And it's a baby. You want to kiss them. Oh, it's so
I know.
hard.
I keep waiting. Like, when can I just get over this urge? Like, it would make it so much easier.
Maybe that's what makes us love our job. We don't lose that.
I guess so. I want to talk about some like real deal stuff. What are some of the things that just drive you insane? From one lactation consultant to the other.
It drives me insane that I have to make people pay out of pocket. And I know that sounds like, oh, ha, ha. But no, I hate it. I think it's ridiculous. I hate that people have to pay me out of pocket and get reimbursed for my services when they're supposed to be covered, when the Affordable Care Act says that they're supposed to have lactation services covered. And I have so many people who will call me and they'll tell me what their insurance company is. And I feel terrible. And I say, I'm really sorry, but in my state, they will not reimburse you. And I'm not going to take money from you that you don't feel like you can give. I hate it. It makes me feel terrible. I feel like these people so badly need help. And I can't be doing it for free. I mean, I do my support group and I help as much as I can in that hour for the people who come, for $5, but I can't do it for free. It's my job. It's my livelihood. And it just drives me insane that families are not better covered when they're supposed to be.
Yeah, it's a very hard thing. I'm very hopeful in the next few years that we'll see a bigger shift. I know that even with the ACA, there's been a little bit of a shift in the last couple of years, but still nothing that makes me happy, makes the phone calls easier when parents call up. And I love one of my IBCLC friends locally told me that she does this in class, and I kind of hate the way it sounds, but I've started doing it anyway because parents have told me that it's been very helpful. And so when they're in a breastfeeding class or a childbirth class, when I talk to parents when they're taking a breastfeeding class, and this one woman does it in childbirth class, she talks about breastfeeding, and she talks about it that, for a lot of women, you're going to need to see someone for help with breastfeeding. And some of you may not. But here's what you should do. Start planning for it now. Right. It's now, June, and you're giving birth in September. Every week, just put aside $15. Yeah. And by the time you get to that point, you will have enough money saved to see a private consultant if you need to. If you don't need to, That's good fun money. Take yourself out on a date night, get a massage, or, just keep the money. But just know that you have it aside in an envelope so that money does not stop you from getting the help that you need. Because here's what happens with people. Some people, in an interesting way, they just can't see beyond the annoyance that insurance company is supposed to pay for it, but they don't.
Right.
And then they don't take it out of their pocket to get the help they need. And sometimes they really can't afford it. But I still think a lot of people can borrow the money. A family member would love nothing better than to help them out. But, I think that's hard because you have to do the ask. But the reality is that some people, I think more people than not can, if they save that money for 3 or 4 months ahead of time and put the money aside. And I've spoken to quite a few people who have said, you know what, that money in the envelope came in real handy because now I'm calling you. I need some help and I'm not feeling stressed out. I know I have that money put aside.
Right. There was one woman that I worked with while I was doing my internship and doing all of my schoolwork, and she said that her job, she was already an IBCLC, she said her job as an IBCLC was to make her job obsolete, that if she did her job well enough, she would teach enough people and help enough people that they could help each other and that she wouldn't need a job anymore. And her goal was to work herself out of a job because no one would need her services. And I thought, yeah, you know what? That would be amazing.
That would be amazing, and we'd always find something else to do.
Oh, yeah.
But, being that, like, we had our issues with our babies, and then we got turned on to the profession, and that's what we're doing. But it would be nice. And that's what feels hard, is to stand there in class and say to people, it's likely that at least half of you are going to need some help with breastfeeding, statistically speaking. And I'd love for you to put aside the money so you're not feeling stressed out when the time comes because you don't have that money in your account.
Right.
So, yeah, it totally sucks, pun intended, and we could probably talk about that for a very, very long time. One of the things I wanted to bring up is website and your blog. So you have a very active blog, and I know that some of the fun things have been controversial. I've gotten in on some of them. What's the one story that you've posted that has attracted the most attention and the most interest?
So I did my master's thesis on low milk supply. I spent 2 years writing it. It's 100 pages. I did a lot of research, a lot of work. I found this thing in psychology that I thought was really cool called response expectancy theory. And what it basically means, it's sort of like a placebo effect. What it means is that if you expect something to happen, it will physically happen in your body, even if that thing didn't exist. So from what I remember, there was one study that they did where they told people that they were going to be drinking regular coffee, and then they gave them decaf. And then they tested the people, and the people's bodies reacted in the same way that they would have if they had had caffeine. So it wasn't that the people were, I think I have caffeine, so I'm going to run really fast. Their blood pressure was higher. Their responses were as if they had had caffeine. And I thought, well, this is really interesting because what if we, and this is a hard thing for me to talk about because I feel like people didn't understand what I was saying. But I was thinking, what if we so often say to people who are going to have a baby that they're not going to make enough milk, so much so that when they have the baby, they actually don't make enough milk because they heard over and over from magazine articles, from whatever, that they were not going to make enough milk. What if this is one of the reasons, one of the many possible reasons that a mom could not make enough milk? Wouldn't that be really interesting if, as a society, we were doing this to ourselves? I found it very interesting. Some other people took it a very different way and thought that I was saying that nobody should ever talk about low milk supply, which wasn't at all what I was saying. And they thought that I was blaming parents, that I was saying it was their fault and that they were doing this to themselves and it was mind over matter, and that was not what I was saying. So it didn't go over well. And that was really hard for me because my whole point in doing my thesis and doing my research and all of it was never, ever, ever, ever to blame anyone. What I was trying to say was maybe there's one more reason why this is happening that isn't your fault, just like all of these other reasons are not your fault. here's another thing that's weird that our society does, and maybe that's causing it too. I don't know. Maybe we should do some research and look into that.
I think that you couldn't have been any more clear, and you talked about your thesis, and I think you stated your case. And I think what happens a lot is that when people hear certain things, particularly if they were not successful, you write one thing and they read something else. You say one thing and they hear something else.
It was very interesting. I mean, I read all the comments that came through on my blog, and they kind of tend to come in waves, so I can always tell when someone has shared it in a place that they don't like it very much, because I start to get a whole bunch of new comments. There's a lot of personal stories and a lot of grief, and I hate that I would have ever caused anyone to feel more of that pain, because I know that it's true pain, and my whole point was not to blame anyone for anything, but to actually, open up the idea that maybe there's this other thing going on that we should look at.
I mean, the thing is, you're absolutely right. And I know that your intention was not to make anybody feel bad. But the thing is, when I was reading it, I know that you're right. And I never really put it out on paper or spoke about it out loud, but I have definitely brought it into my breastfeeding classes in daily practice in a way that, like, for instance, I've had quite a few young moms come into class, and they are saying that they're in class because they really want help. They don't want what happened to their mother to happen to them.
Right.
And what they're saying is, my mother had 2 babies and she never made enough milk.
Yep.
And I hope that doesn't happen to me. And so I talked to them about, well, I have no idea what happened with your mother. And then I actually give them a couple of instances what may have happened, that, their mother may have had the potential to make enough milk, but it could have been breastfeeding mismanagement. And I explain it a little bit, and by the time we're done with the class, they totally understand that the milk wasn't removed efficiently or frequently,
right.
And how that could happen. But I also talk to them about getting an index card or a Post-it note or whatever, and just, and to meditate and visualize themselves making all this milk, and just assume, like, rather than assume you're not going to, let's assume that you are. And when I have a mom in a consult, and she's literally saying, well, the baby hates the right side. The baby won't go to the right side. I don't know what's wrong with the right side. And then we get the baby eventually on the right side. And then when some moms, you just still feel a lack of confidence. And then when they're getting ready to leave, there's that one little piece of lack of confidence that comes out and says, well, I hope I'm able to breastfeed on that right side when I go home. And I tell them, you may struggle a little bit, but first of all, you cannot say that the baby didn't breastfeed on the right side anymore, because you had this beautiful feeding here. You can breastfeed, and you will breastfeed on the right side. Might you have a little struggle, a little back and forth? I expect that you probably will, but I need for you to tell yourself now, you have breastfed on the right side, and therefore you will continue to breastfeed on the right side. So in that way, I've been telling moms to change their thinking. What you did was you just laid it out in such a way that I think it gave some people who may not have been successful or struck a wrong chord to really think about it and then kind of get their dander up about it.
Yeah. And, it's very hard. I mean, there's so many different reasons that you could possibly not make enough milk. And that's why we have so much experience, because what I've learned in all of these years is it's not as simple as saying, for some people, it doesn't matter how many times you remove the milk. If there's other issues, glandular tissue issues, hypoplasia, there's all these other issues you could be having and not make enough milk. And so I've learned to not boil anything down. There's so many different ways to know or not know. And that's why I really focus on the families that I work with, getting them through one day at a time. And this is how today you can make sure that it's enough. And if you start to get worried, I'll help you and we'll see what's going on. It's hard for me when I hear new families before they've had the baby saying, I don't know, how do I make sure I make enough? Because I don't know if I'm going to make enough. I don't think I'm going to make enough. I don't think I'm going to make enough. And then that's so hard. You haven't done it yet.
Right. You haven't done it yet. So that's what I say. I say, well, I don't really know why you think that, because I expect you to make plenty of milk for your baby.
Right.
if you're struggling, then of course we're going to meet and we'll talk and we'll figure it out. But I expect you, so try and get them to turn around. So, getting back to your blog post, I thought it was excellent. I thought it was interesting. It actually didn't surprise me what happened afterwards. And I think I sent you a note and said, I'm sorry that this is happening to you if it's driving you crazy. But the other piece to that is I actually love that it brings up the conversation and gets people talking. I like that part of the controversy. I wasn't the brunt of it.
And what was interesting for me was, I stewed for a while, and then I thought, you know what? I did just pull like 2 pages out of this 90-page document and throw them out there into the world. And I can see why people would think that I was just pulling random stuff out of the air. So you know what? I'm going to go back in and I'm going to take out more of the parts and I'm going to change the language so that they're, not written in such an academic way. And I'm going to really show that I've really gone pretty far deep into this, and I'm going to share what I know, because clearly jumping in the middle and throwing something out into the world.
It's live and learn. Like, we have these thoughts in our head, we put it out there, and then bang, we get something back. And so I've noticed that you've been doing that, and at the show notes, I'm going to post the info so people can go and check out your blog and what you've been writing about that one particular subject and all the other great posts that you've had. I'm really enjoying it. I wanted to ask you one other question. I'd like for you to talk to us a little bit about what I imagine a lot of people are not familiar with, but talk to us about chest feeding.
Chest feeding. This is a subject that's very near and dear to my heart. Most people don't realize that biological males, men who were born males, can actually lactate. It doesn't usually happen on its own. It's usually a lot of work if you actually wanted to do it, but you could do it. Men have most of the same tissue that women have, just comes in a different way once you hit puberty. Although we are, of course, used to women breastfeeding, there are other people who maybe were born with a certain set of genitalia or a certain, born with their parents thinking that they are a certain way. And it turns out that no, as they grow up, we realize that their gender is different. So there are transgender people who are men who may have been born with some female reproductive organs, and they can actually have babies, and if they choose to, they can nurse the babies. But sometimes the sound of breastfeeding can be really painful, can be really problematic. If you felt like you were stuck in the wrong body for a very long time and you fought through that and then decided that you wanted to have a child, you might want to nurse that child. But when someone says breastfeeding, it might really be painful to you. And so I talk about chest feeding, and there's a lot of people who talk about chest feeding. Usually when we're talking about it, we are talking about transgender men. So men who are nursing their babies. Sometimes they also birth those babies, and sometimes they don't. Just every family is different. So I try my very hardest in everything that I write and everything that I say, although it so much depends on who I'm talking to talk about parents instead of moms and dads, or, moms or dad. I don't always talk about just moms when I'm talking about nursing. I talk about dads too. It's something that a lot of practitioners aren't very aware of, and that can cause a lot of issues for somebody who's already had a lot of problems in the medical community and is just trying to take care of their baby the best way that they know how, and they need to get help chest feeding their baby, but they are not sure that the provider that they want to go to is going to be safe or knowledgeable.
What are some of the initial things that you would do for someone who's interested in chest feeding?
So we'll talk a lot about if they've had any surgeries, what surgeries they've had, if we have any idea. It tends to be better if we can do it in person so we can take a look at what we're working with, but you never really know. So, and that's the same for, if someone's a woman who's had a breast reduction. There are different surgeries, but you just never really know unless you're for sure that the surgeon did a specific thing that we know there's no way that milk could be produced. It's a lot of education. There are sometimes, depending on if a person has had surgery, sometimes there's some extra tools that we need to use to make it work. But it's doable, and it's really important that you see that person as a man, because they're a man nursing their baby. They're a dad nursing their baby, and the amount of respect that they need and deserve, they need to get it. It's really important.
Well, thank you for sharing that with us. I think so many people don't really understand. I think you've explained it in a way very, I think, helpful for us to know that there are parents who do want to chest feed and why they might want to. I just think it's so important that there are practitioners around like you and or I who are open-minded, because there are certainly some who, people just are way inside the box and can't think outside the box and don't understand and may not be as helpful to parents as they really deserve that same respect.
Right. And it's a matter of really, there are people who will just say, yeah, I'm open to anything. That's fine. Come see me. It's really an issue that you should really, if you're thinking about making sure that your practice is very inclusive, it's really important to get some education on it. It's really important to make sure that what you're saying and what you're doing match up, and that you're not just saying, yeah, I'm super open-minded. Yeah, come on over. I'll do it. There's knowledge that goes along with it. There's training that goes along with it. And it's very important to me, to my family, to my friends. It's the soapbox that I choose to stand on. And it's something that I care very deeply about. I
find that when I'm working with people who are interested in doing things outside the norm, that they're actually really cool people to work with, because especially people looking into chest feeding or a lesbian couple and maybe both of them want to breastfeed, I'm saying outside the norm,
yep,
that they're actually really cool people to work with, because they've just been through so much, and I'm not proud to say that, but they've been in many awkward positions. They've been bullied, made fun of, but they're used to thinking way outside the box. And then I get to try different things with them, and they're like, yeah, let's try that. Someone else is like, no, that's kind of weird, And I'm like, you're stunting my growth here. I really want to try and help you. Can't we try this? But they're like the coolest people, because they're just willing to try most things. How they're growing up, they're in the lifestyle, and how other people are treating them, that they're just so open-minded. So I find some of those consults a lot of fun.
Yeah, it can be very eye-opening, and it's fascinating. And man, the people who get to co-nurse, it would be so nice to have an extra set of nipples around that baby can go on for a while if you just really want to go take a shower.
If people really think about it, like, man, wouldn't that be nice?
Oh man, it's the kind of thing that sounds amazing to me.
I know years ago, the closest, like in my very early days, the closest that I came to even something like that were two female siblings, heterosexual couples. They worked their baby making around their working schedule so that one could stay home and breastfeed both the babies.
Oh, that's awesome.
And then the other could have her pregnancy and birth, and after her maternity leave was over, she could leave her baby with her sister, who would also nurse her baby. And that was probably, I don't know, maybe like 22 years ago or so, and I don't know, hopefully I'm more enlightened, but to me 22 years or so ago, that was fascinating, and that was big, and that was out of the box.
Oh, it makes me want a sister so bad.
Well, I would love for you to share with us, if my listeners, anybody wanted to get in touch with you, how could they go about doing that? I'd love for you to tell us what your website is. And I imagine on your website they can get all of the other information. They could read your blog posts. They could probably get to your Facebook. But any contact info for you if people in your area were looking for a home visit from you?
Yep. So my website is Rachel O'Brien, IBCLC. My name is spelled RACHEL. Everything else, my Twitter, my Facebook, my Pinterest, it's all hooked up through my website. So that's really the best way to reach me. And all my blog is there. You can go through all the posts and see all the comments that people have left for me. I try to blog once a week. So I love to have new readers.
Great. Yeah. So everybody can get to see all the stuff we've been talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Rachel, it truly has been a really wonderful treat and a pleasure for me to be able to hang out with another IBCLC and get the scoop on your practice and everything else. So I really appreciate you.
Thank you so much. This has been so much fun. I've had such a good time.
Thanks for hanging out with me for another great show here at All About Breastfeeding. If you would like to learn more about me, please check out allaboutbreastfeeding.biz/about. Until the next show, bye-bye.